Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
Ask the A&Ps is the show where we take on your most difficult maintenance questions and do our best to come up with answers. So if you have a difficult maintenance question, the more difficult, the better. Please email your questions to podcasts@aopa.org, and we'll try to get you on the show.
And make sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode full of questionable answers.
We take easy questions too.
Or answerable questions.
We take easy ones are good too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you'd like to get on our email list, the easiest way to do that is to text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777. Put yourself on our mailing list.
So last year, you guys had a lot of fun talking about flat tires and things on the way, and
the Odyssey to Oshkosh. Yes.
That's right. And Colleen stealing a tire, not quite.
Oh yeah, you
that was a great photo.
Wrote that up for AOPA Pilot Magazine.
Yes.
I got to have a little event on the way home, somewhat indirectly. Yeah. So I left Sunday to go to Duluth to go through some refresher CAPS training. So I spent 2 days in Superior and Duluth, which was wonderful. There was no snow, good time of year to go to Duluth. Getting ready to leave Wednesday morning, had a little alternator problem. Alt 1 failed, and I tried it a couple of times, did the normal troubleshooting, borrowed a voltmeter, all that kind of stuff.
Did you notice this on the ground? Or
on the ground?
Yep, noticed it on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So, fired everything up, and as I'm taxing out, I realized the 28 volts that I had on Alt 1 when I started was now not there when I was doing the engine run up. So I tried a few things, didn't work, taxied back, put a voltmeter on, and the voltage at the field terminal of Alt 1, which, you can easily get to without even taking the cowling off, was low. So I'm thinking, okay, this has got to be a field control module, which is inside the MCU, and which is all very repairable. And it's very convenient that a wonderful supply house is just like 25-minute drive down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So we called them. I went back to Cirrus, which I'd been the day before, got a field control module, drove back to the airplane, they have a maintenance hangar there. The mechanic wasn't in. So they rolled me right in and said, use all the tools you want. So I did. I don't even think I can call it, Mike likes to call it battlefield repair, but I was in a maintenance shop with all the tools and everything. Replaced the FCM, cranked it up, everything checked good. I am all prepared now for the alternator to fail, which naturally, right after takeoff, it did. And no big deal. And it's VFR the whole trip. So I just started load shedding. And I thought, well, I don't want to fly around.
So putting the new FCM seemed to fix it, but then it
did not.
Yep. And you were prepared for that? Is that
mentally,
a common failure?
Oh gosh, the first four Cirrus that we saw at our shop many years ago, figuratively fell out of the sky. All 4 due to alternator failures. They were all 4 Alt 1 failures. So before we were ever a Cirrus service center, we were pretty well first in the electrical system failures. But anyway, so I'm flying along.
Now you've got a very early serial number Cirrus, right?
Yeah, 187. So
does it still have that old cheesy MCU that they originally? Or was it upgraded to a later?
It was upgraded not to the latest, but to a later version. So I have a 120, which is plenty good, works fine. Nice thing is it's easily maintainable. So I was able to replace this part without having to take the MCU off the airplane. A lot of people are under the misconception that the MCU is a part. And when it has a problem, you have to replace the whole thing. The reality is,
Well, that was a myth that Cirrus was propagating early on when the Cirrus first came out.
yeah, they didn't want people diving into it.
No user replaceable parts.
Right. Well, it's in the parts catalog.
Break seal to void warranty.
Yeah, well, it's all shown in the parts catalog. If you just look, all the piece part, you get part numbers and everything, so it's really not a problem. And the reality is, there are relays and fuses and more relays, and
all the stuff.
Each piece is replaceable.
They're all replaceable. And
the FCM is what we used to call a regulator.
A voltage regulator, right? But it's Cirrus, so you have to give it a fancy name.
And the relays in there are what we used to call the starter contactor and the master contactor. Yeah. It's all packaged into a box. Same thing on the restart Cessnas, right? They package everything into an MCU.
Put everything into an MCU.
Master control unit.
Yep, master control unit. And so it's the same thing as on a legacy 182 from 1970. You just take all the parts and put them inside a box and call it an MCU. There's nothing, quote, special about it. So I'm flying along and it goes offline, and this is right after takeoff. So I just reach down and start pulling circuit breakers for everything that I don't need. And my battery,
your number 2 alternator in that airplane is that little BNC thing, right?
Little BNC.
The newer Cirruses have 2 really pretty much full-size alternators. But
right. So Alt 2 and Essential Bus were running it right
what is that thing rated at? 30 some odd amps or
about
something?
20.
20?
Yeah, 20 amps. Okay. Which is plenty. I mean, you can fly all day on that.
Well, it's enough to keep your transponder and your number 1 radio running.
Well, the transponder's not on the Essential Bus. The autopilot is, though, which is odd. But
that says something.
Speaks volumes. So I started pulling circuit breakers on the main bus, and nothing that I needed wasn't working. So I'm flying along, and I have 24.9 volts, and 30 minutes later, I have 24.8 volts. It's like, well, man, I can, and it's a 4-hour flight. So I'm thinking this is going to be, I'm going to fly all the way home just like this. Not going to be a problem at all. I'm not telling anybody that I have a problem.
You're using slightly more current than the little alternator is putting out, but not a lot. Right.
And the little alternator is not powering the main bus. It only powers the Essential. So
I thought the main bus was powered through a diode from the Essential bus, no?
No, it's the other way. So the Essential bus gets powered through a diode from the main bus.
I see.
And the diode keeps the 20 amp alternator from being able to power more than what it can put out. So it's only powering the Essential bus.
But the battery is still powering the main bus.
The battery's powering the main bus, and I'm flying along thinking, this just works really well. No problem at all. And then probably 45 minutes into the flight, I'm thinking, because I can't not try, I thought, I'm going to see if it'll come on. I switch it on, and the voltage just starts going nuts. It's going from 24.8 to 27.5, then back down, and somewhere in between. And it's not overvolting. And I'm thinking, this is interesting. So all kinds of troubleshooting is going through my head.
Is it a loose wire or something? Huh?
Well, I don't think it was a wire because of the way it was moving. Just watching how the voltage goes, and it took it about 3 minutes, and it hit 27.7 volts and rock solid.
There?
And it just stayed
really?
There. Yeah. So got the airplane home. We're putting the alternator back on. I bought a couple of brushes for it.
That's the other thing I was thinking is whether the brushes were worn out.
Well, my thought exactly, but when we opened it up, they weren't. But the slip rings were just totally coated in a varnish. So high resistance. So we cleaned that off. I went ahead and put the brushes on, and I'll let you know this afternoon if it works.
Oh, wow.
I'll go out and test
I was always scared to take one of those alternators apart because I figured they're easy to take apart, but they're hard to get back together again.
Well, it is interesting.
How do you hold the brushes retracted as you're putting the...
Safety wire.
the thing back
Oh
in.
yeah, there's actually a
Or
little pin. that you put
Dental
in.
floss.
No, it's got a hole in
Dental
there.
floss.
It's actually not hard to do at all.
Mm.
But finding the manual was an issue because this alternator is no longer in production.
Hmm.
The newer ones have a different part number, and I didn't want to go buy a new alternator. Not that it was all that expensive, but
Mhm.
you know. And we test the slip on the coupler. The slip has no slip issues at all. It only has about 1,200 hours on it, so it's going right back on, no problem. And I was going to say we found the manual online, Google. Thank you, Google. And we actually found the correct manual for the unit, so we're able to do everything in accordance with the manual. It was interesting. The end of the shaft has needle bearings in the case, and there's a grease in there, but nowhere in the manual did it state which grease to use. And I thought that was interesting. However, there aren't many greases that are green. So we found our green grease.
The snot grease.
The snot looking grease. And
Okay.
we put it in there.
Okay, you did by color, grease by color.
Yeah, you know. So on Mike's airplane, he has is it an AD for the alternator?
It used to be back
Right.
in the day. With all those alternators now have been replaced with ones
Right.
with sealed bearings, but it used to be that
Yeah.
that there
Well-
was an AD that required you to relubricate that non-drive end bearing of the alternator.
Yep. Which is green, just so you know. That's why we had the grease. Because we used to do Twin Cessna work, so we had
Has chlorophyll in it.
Yeah.
Paul,
So Paul, let me ask you to conduct a thought experiment. Supposing this wasn't your airplane, supposing a customer brought his airplane in and described all the symptoms that you had, what would you have done? Would you have put a new alternator on there, or would have you taken everything apart? And
Well,
I mean, that sounds really super labor intensive. What you did, obviously.
and why did you replace the FCM first? Was that the problem, or was it the alternator?
well, so it is a little weird. The readings that I got testing the voltage at the field terminal, the alternator is like the first easiest thing you do.
Sure.
And with the battery, now you just to be clear, because you never know who's listening. This is done with the engine not running.
Right.
Okay.
And you should get something roughly on the order of battery voltage.
Battery voltage,
right.
24 or so volts. And I had way less than that,
Okay.
which was an indicator that the FCM was not putting out, or that I had some sort of connection issue. I checked the connection issues as a part of my opening the MCU. Everything was tight. And by the way, that is an issue with MCUs, that they have connectors. There's a lot of connectors in there that get overheated and do other things. Mine had none of that. So the FCM was the target.
Okay.
And so I put the FCM on. Everything went back together. It ran fine initially. I don't quite understand how the alternator problem would cause the voltage to appear low on the field terminal. So it's entirely possible that there were two issues.
Two issues. Okay.
So either way, I think I would have done the same thing if a customer had been in the shop. I would have probably followed the same process. So another little thought process.
You mean including opening up the alternator and?
Oh, well, no, I get your point there. I probably would not have opened up that old of an alternator for a customer. I would probably have gone to replacement, and most Cirrus owners would have preferred that. Cost difference was not a big deal. The brushes were.
It was a curiosity.
Yeah, the brushes.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I couldn't not take it apart. And so the brushes were expensive, like $200 and something bucks.
Oh yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And a replacement alternator is only, I don't know, $1,200 or something. So by the time we got done, I didn't really save any money.
Yeah.
And no real money, but
you learned a lot about alternators.
I learned a little bit about these old alternators, and curiosity was satisfied. And I hate to have usable parts sitting on the shelf that,
Yep.
euthanized in that way. So,
Yep.
yeah, for a customer, I would have told them we can replace the brushes or we can replace the alternator. And here's the difference in price. And as always, let the customer make the decision.
Interesting.
I don't make decisions for customers. I let them do that.
I have to say, as the breakdown manager at Savvy, alternator and charging system problems is the number one call that we get.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is very common problem for people for a variety of reasons, whatever. It's a complicated system and there's all kinds of ways it can fail and the pilot sees it right away, right? So,
yeah. Well, so that's the thing. They don't. That's a problem. They will take, especially on an older airplane, like an old 210 or 182, there's no voltmeter. There's an amp meter.
Mm-hmm.
And the amp meter is horrible. Well, your airplane has an amp meter.
But when the radios stop working or the starter won't turn over,
of course,
they see it right away.
Later
nowadays, a lot of us have stuff in the panel that does have voltmeters, like a engine monitor or
right. But it should be something that
Garmin 696 on my panel. It reads out bus voltage too. But
you want it checked before takeoff, and I find a surprising number of people don't notice until they're airborne, like you say, when the radio's not working right. And they'll call me up and I look at the data and realize they never had the alternator working from the start.
Yeah.
They didn't check.
That the ammeter was showing.
Yeah, I think it is really important to have a voltmeter and if nothing else, you can
buy an automotive one.
One that plugs into the cigarette lighter side.
Yes.
Down at the RV store, they have them. Plug them right in. Absolutely. So I did a little presentation at Oshkosh, since we're all talking about Oshkosh, for the Cessna Owners Organization at their dinner on Monday night. Like 10 minutes, amps and volts, just real simple, just cutting.
How prescient of you.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't think about that till you just said it. It was very timely. But if people just look at the volts after they've started the engine, and if it's running about 28 or 14, it's huge. But what most owners don't really grasp is that the alternator, the charging system, is the primary electrical system. The battery is the secondary, and people think of it the other way around. So for goodness sakes, don't take off with your primary system not working, and certainly don't take off with your secondary system not properly charged. Because you get in, if I'd taken off into IFR and not noticed this, it would have been a very different story. So yeah, that's just anyway, it was fun. It was interesting. And I got to take an alternator apart. Our first question is from Roger, who has sensed a disturbance in the force. Go ahead, Roger. And thanks for having an airplane in the background, by the way.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I own a 78 J model Mooney, as you can infer from my background.
Very cool.
A3B6D 200 horsepower engine.
Oh, I hate those D's on the end.
Well, that's the way it is.
That's the way it is. Yeah.
So airframe has 5,000 hours, and the engine has 2,700 hours, which I attribute to following the gospel according to Bush.
Oh, gosh.
Love it.
The main gospel is don't euthanize it if it doesn't need to.
That's right.
Yeah, he's doing it. Yep.
So over the last several hundred hours, it's started to develop an odd starting problem. So let me describe the starting procedure in the POH, namely crack the throttle 1/4 of an inch, mixture full rich, turn on the boost pump for 5 seconds, pull the throttle back dial cutoff, engage the starter, a few turns, and it lights off. But that's not working anymore. And over time, I've had to increase the time in running the boost pump. Maybe it's 8 or 9 or sometimes 10 seconds. And then sometimes it actually doesn't quite stay started. And it'll make a few rounds and turn off again. And then I have to start over, hit it with a few more seconds. It's just 2 or 3 of the boost pump. Back to idle cutoff and start it. And eventually it gets going. So what's going on?
And when it gets going fine. It smooths out.
Yes. Yeah. It may stumble for a couple of seconds, but then it's smooth.
So I'm very interested in this question because I've been experiencing something very similar with my IO360.
Aha.
Where it's very sluggish to start, and it doesn't seem to be a starter because the prop is turning over, but it just catches, and I go full rich on the mixture, and it's like very slow, chugga. Okay, I'm here. And it never used to do that. And my husband said, I don't think you're priming it enough, inferring that I wasn't delivering enough fuel, but I'm priming it the same way I always used to prime it. So I've begun to wonder if maybe my boost pump is becoming long in the tooth. The boost pump is what I use to prime it. And I haven't flow checked my boost pump, but as far as I know, it's never been overhauled or out of the airframe. And we're talking over 4,000 hours. So I'm wondering if it's a fuel issue.
Well, I infer that the boost pump is running properly because I look at the fuel pressure gauge. And
yeah,
it's coming
I do
up,
too.
up normally.
Yeah.
But now that doesn't necessarily mean we're getting the volume.
Yeah.
But it does. But I am getting the pressure.
Right.
Well, has anything been done to the flow divider over the last however many years?
No.
So flow dividers age. By the way, that model Mooney is what my sister, Dad, and I put one together for my sister to fly in the Air Race Classic in 1978. And that was pretty cool. That was the first year, isn't it? Or is it the second year?
No. Roy LaPlesti put together the first two Mooney 201 in 76. But this,
production-wise?
Yeah, production-wise, it started at the end of 76. But this is serial number 653, so they had a few behind them.
That's a little newer than what she flew. But I would also be concerned about fuel delivery, but more from the flow divider, because the flow divider has a bellows-like device that can get really stiff, and it takes more pressure to open it than it would when it was newer. It's not as supple or whatever. It just doesn't flex as well. And I have that on my IO550. I have to hit the boost pump sometimes to get it to come back on. Doesn't affect it once it warms up just a little bit and has a little flow. Engine runs just fine after it gets going. It's just during the starting process that changes a little bit. But
yeah, my two thoughts when I was listening to Roger, one was the flow divider, and the other one was whether the idle mixture is set correctly on the servo, and
that's a good one.
It's easy to do an RPM rise test. You know what I'm talking about, Roger?
Yeah.
To see if the idle mixture needs to be tweaked a little bit, but those seemed like the two things that came to mind when you were describing the symptoms.
So the idle mixture.
That's not my problem, but
I mean, tweaking the idle mixture is pretty easy. Turn the screw.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little like star-shaped wheel or something on that servo.
Yep. Yeah, right. Yep. Flow dividers a little more involved.
Not bad. It sits on top of the engine.
Yeah, it's
easy
nice
to remove and put together. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to send it out though. Would you send the flow divider out without sending the servo? Should the flow divider just be looked at separately?
Yeah, you can send it out. Yeah, by itself. It's not a problem. And that flow divider on that airplane is a dog to get off. It's
in which airplane?
Flow divider?
Oh, the servo.
The servo. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the flow divider is easy.
Flow divider, it's easy.
Interesting. And
And,
Go
and
ahead.
anything on the back of the engine is impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
I've done the prop strike inspections before, where you have to pull the dowel pin off the crankshaft and do the gear. So removing the accessory housing, I've done that without pulling the engine on a Mooney. I'm not
Did you tilt
recommending
it down?
but I did it.
I mean, what I've done in the past is take out the mounts at the top, or take out the bolts of the mounts at the top, and let the whole thing rock down.
No, did not do that.
You didn't do that.
Interesting.
No.
Okay.
Paul,
Yeah.
I'm shocked that you just admitted that you've worked on a Mooney. I didn't think I would ever hear you say that.
Well, I was a teenager, and
This was
Dad was a Mooney fan, and my sister Janice is a Mooney fan. And as I've said here before, she owns a Mooney Mustang, not a Mooney Might, a Mooney Mustang.
Wow.
Yeah, she and her husband are serious.
Yeah.
How the heck do you keep those things running nowadays?
You'll have to talk to Billy. Janice is the pilot, and Billy is the mechanic, and it's an effort to keep that airplane flying.
I would guess there were more than one or two owner-produced parts in that airplane by now.
We try not to talk about that.
So if Roger and I are pulling our Spider and sending it out for a bench check, my first thought was airflow performance. Would they be the likely place to send it? Or
Yeah.
I wouldn't do a bench check. I'd just tell them to go through it.
I ran it? Or
The cost is going to be the same. They have it apart.
well, whatever. Okay, but yeah, I'll explain the problem and I'll say this hasn't been looked at in a while. But would you recommend airflow or another place?
We've tried a couple of different places. We've done Mike's Fuel Metering.
Yeah,
Oh, I've
sent
heard of
my
them
stuff
too.
out to
Right.
Mike's Fuel Metering. No relation, by the way.
Yeah.
They're in Tulsa, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple others I can't remember. We've tried 2 or 3 different ones just to see how they do. This is a pretty simple part.
Right.
It has a piston, and the piston attaches to this. I'll call it a bellows because I don't know really what they call it. And it has to be centered because it goes down into a cylinder and it can drag on one side. So before you send it out, take it apart.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Take it apart. You want to see how it works.
I think it's safety wired together, and it has one of those those lead seals on it, like "Do not mess with the safety wire." And
These
stuff.
2,700 hours. There are no warranty issues here.
Yeah. So what are we looking for? We're looking for.
And then do what? Yeah.
Yeah.
There are 4 screws that hold the cap on.
But it's got a diaphragm in there and a spring.
Yep, diaphragm and a spring, and
Don't
then
lose
you'll
any
see
parts,
the piston that's attached to the diaphragm. Yeah, don't lose parts.
Okay.
And you can look at the side of this piston to see if it's been dragging.
And it's got a sleeve valve in there that's a real close tolerance fit in there.
But you're not going to fix it. I'm not suggesting that you fix it, but just for curiosity's sake, because you're that guy, I can tell that you want to take it apart. You want to see what it looks like. And you're going to put it right back together and put it in a box.
And put it in a Ziploc bag. And
Yeah. There's no wink, nod here. You're not going to take it apart and fix it and put it back.
No.
Do not do that. But you do want to take it apart before you send it out, just to satisfy the curiosity.
I'll tell you what, Roger, I'll do mine, you do yours, and we can both compare notes when we get them back.
Great idea, Colleen.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that that characteristic of me showed so clearly.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Appreciate the call, Roger. It's a good
So
question.
I have one parting item for you.
Okay.
You guys probably remember a weekly show on automotive matters, which was called Car Talk.
Car Talk.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Car Talk.
Yeah, Click and Clack,
of course
the
we
Tappet
do.
Brothers.
Click and Clack the Tappet
No, that
Brothers.
was
Yeah.
actually the inspiration for this podcast.
Yes.
Well, they had a segment on that show which was called Stump the Chumps.
Stump
Yeah, we
the
do that
Chump.
every day.
Every day. Every question on this show is Stump the Chump.
That is a much better ring to it than Ask the A&Ps.
Oh, yeah. Talk to Ian about
Yeah,
that.
tell Ian about that.
I hear you.
We'd have
Okay.
to change our logo.
Logo. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the help, guys. Colleen and I will compare notes on our flow divider.
We have some
Sounds
homework to
great.
do, Roger. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Check,
See ya.
Roger.
check
Thank
your
you.
RPM rise first.
Bye.
Yep.
Yeah,
check
that's
that
the easy
first.
one.
Good
Yep.
call.
That's easy.
Okay. Yeah,
Thank
that's easy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Our next question is from Craig, who is doing some DIY, that's do-it-yourself maintenance in his airplane. Go ahead, Craig.
I've got a Cessna 182M 1968, and I use it primarily for going back and forth between my fishing cabin. It's not really a cabin, it's an RV, but you get the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I wind up hauling a bunch of stuff in the back seat of it, or not in the back seat, in the back of it. So I've taken the back seat out of it. And the carpet's pretty ratty and old, and I'm not an aesthetics guy. This is a truck for me. So I got this bright idea. I didn't make it up, but I want to put some plywood back there because I don't want to tear, punch into the aluminum. And I recalled I fly for a living, and I recalled my old cargo days when I used to fly these piston twins around. That my boss had done the same thing. He had, I think it was 3/4 inch plywood back there because we had a lot of punches. It wasn't secured. It was just Velcroed. And anyway, I talked to my A&P friend about it, and he said, I don't think you can do that because issues with catching on fire. And I said, well, what's the difference if I'm securing it with Velcro? What's the difference between just saying that I'm going to take some plywood down to the coast or having it on the floor and putting stuff on top of it?
Yep.
Anyway, just wondering what your take on all that is. I'm not attaching it to the airplane with anything other than Velcro.
But that's how people get by with putting GPSs on their control yoke.
Yeah, you just hit the button. You are 100% correct, Craig, and your A&P is 100% incorrect. Things that are installed in or attached to your aircraft are under the regulations part of the aircraft, and they have to meet certification requirements. Anything that is not attached to or installed in your aircraft, it doesn't need to be certified. I mean, when you throw 3 suitcases in the back, those don't have to be certified suitcases because they're not installed in or attached to your aircraft. And the general rule is that attached to the aircraft is generally interpreted to mean attached with some sort of structural fastener, a rivet, a screw, a cam lock, something,
Yeah.
But generally speaking, suction cups and Velcro don't count. Those are not structural attachments. So now, interesting that you said you took the back seat out. Now that is a significant event, which actually requires an A&P to rework your weight and balance, because that seat that you took out, that was attached to the aircraft in a structural way, and so the weight and balance should be reworked for the seat being removed. But putting a bunch of plywood in there and Velcroing it down to the aluminum, knock yourself out. That's not an appliance.
Yes. That was my understanding too. And as regards the weight and balance, I've actually done that. You guys had mentioned it on a podcast some years back, so I'd heard that. And when I pulled the seat out, I went and redid the weight and balance, and had a IA buddy of mine okay it. So I've taken care of that part of it. I was I was just concerned about, I didn't want to get in trouble, but I remember in my cargo days, we had strips of plywood laid on the floors in all of our old freighters. So
yeah,
not screwed down, just laid. That's the key.
Not screwed down.
Mm-hmm.
And 3/4 inch is a bit thick for what you're doing. You might go with something a little thinner. It might even try a different material. 3/4 inch thick ply to cover a 182 floor is going to.
Well, since it's a rigid floor, all you probably need is 1/4 inch plywood or something.
Yeah,
Just
quarter
trying
be
to
fine,
protect-
and it's
yeah.
flat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
like it's not like a 210 that has a little change in direction. It's nice flat floor.
I'm not taking anything real heavy, a small toolbox, but coolers and fishing stuff.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be anything thicker than that. Well, that answers my question. And but before I go, Paul, I recently emailed you. I did my I helped my IA out with the annual. I did it myself this year he did it, but I did all the work on it. And we had come across a problem with the flap, and it was making all kind of noise, the flap motor. And I had emailed you, and I was just knocked out when I got an email back a few days later. And anyway, we did exactly what you said, and there was nothing wrong with it. So I appreciate it. I couldn't believe it. So
Wow,
thank you.
Flaps are easy.
Yep.
I do answer emails. Sometimes it takes me a while. Helen doesn't let me talk on the phone, but she lets me answer emails.
Flaps are easy. I was just looking at my flaps. They're pretty complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on with those flaps.
Is a lot. Yeah.
Has the follower cable and rigging. Yeah.
Rigging is the thing, but just the flap motor making noise and stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Not so bad.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Well, good.
I'm glad that worked out.
Well, thank
Craig,
you all.
Yeah, it sounds like you dodged the regulatory bullet. Just watch out for those termites now. You'll be good to go.
Maybe you should call up those WeatherTech guys that make the bed liners for pickup trucks and see if they'll make one for a 182.
Yeah.
You can buy rubber mat.
Yeah.
And large.
Something like that would be.
And cut it to fit. That might be be easy to roll up and roll out.
That's a good point. Yeah, getting it in the cockpit.
Yeah, and not as heavy as
heavy,
and not a projectile if you have an issue and have to do a forced landing.
Yeah.
So
be sure and strap all that stuff down with the net. By the way.
Yeah.
I've got nets and ties, and I've got all kinds of stuff to keep it down.
Sounds like he's done this before.
Yeah, I think Craig sounds like he's been around the patch once.
Yeah, he was asking a regulatory question. He didn't need help with the other stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.
Great talking with you. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Craig.
I love the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Our next question is from Aaron, who's wondering where the metal in his oil filter is coming from. Go ahead, Aaron. That's a good question.
And Aaron, while he's not in an airplane, at least he has one in the background.
It's a picture of it.
You get some points for that.
Yeah,
that is in fact my 1967 Piper Cherokee 140 named Emily.
Emily,
and, yes, back in the early spring, she started making metal in the oil. And after digging into reading Mike's engine book in the making metal section, I did confirm that it was aluminum that indeed it was making, and followed Lycoming's guide on if you find metal in your oil, what to do about it. And my mechanic and I have a suspicion of where it was coming from, and I wanted to ask in a Lycoming 0320 D3G what the most likely place that it could be coming from, and then how to determine which of the 4 jugs, if not all, do you have to pull to address this situation?
Colleen has the answer for this one.
I had this problem. Yeah. I didn't catch it in the filter. I caught it in the analysis earlier, but same thing. And I was not an A&P back then. I think my mechanic bore scoped the cylinders looking for scuffing from the piston pin plug backing out. And we saw evidence and pulled the cylinder and found it had lost a lot of metal against the steel sides of the cylinders. Now, you said you bore scoped and you didn't see any evidence of that in your cylinders.
Correct. Yes, we bore scoped all 4 of them, and there were 2 that maybe had some suspicion of it, and then 2 that didn't. And it was kind of reading tea leaves to try to figure out if it was scuffing that was during break-in or if it was continuing to do this.
And the scuffing that you would see is
not going to be any scuffing during break-in.
Nope.
What kind of, out of curiosity, what kind of bore scope were you using?
It was my mechanic's bore scope. He had one of the solid, I guess, probe style where you stick it into the. It's not a flexible wand style.
You really need to get one of those newfangled high resolution,
High def, a high res one.
scopes. Because what you're looking for is sort of a smear of aluminum at either the 9 or 3 o'clock position on the cylinder wall.
Yeah, that's what we were kind of looking for. And like I said, it was a bit of a.
How long has this thing been making aluminum? Aluminum.
So the appreciable, it started making it. I went another 5 hours between oil changes per Lycoming's guidance. After the 5-hour check, it didn't really have any in it. So then I went again per Lycoming's thing. I went another 10. In actuality, it was like 15 hours, and it made quite a bit in that 15 hours. So
when you say quite a bit, are you talking about?
There was aluminum in every single pleat of the oil filter.
That's quite a bit.
And
was it flaky?
It was so the flake dimensions. I could show you the pictures. I don't know if I can present them, but they were roughly 1/8 of an inch long, about a 32nd inch wide.
Wow.
And maybe barely 1/1000th thick. I mean, super thin. But and the interesting thing is the oil analysis didn't actually show up aluminum because the pieces were actually too big.
Too big.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a piston pin plug to me.
Yeah, something else is amok.
So,
it won't show up in the analysis because the analysis is looking for parts per million. And
yes, it's looking for tiny things.
Yeah.
And so that was the interesting thing is when I did the analysis on every single one of these samples, it didn't show appreciable oil aluminum increase in the oil because the paper spin-on filter was actually catching everything. Yeah. And I also did pull the suction screen at the bottom as well during these changes. And I found some shavings in the suction screen. So at least it confirmed that it was coming from basically, I think from the piston area, not from the accessory case or other things that have aluminum in there.
Is your analysis showing any other elevated metal?
Yeah.
It was slightly high on iron. The iron levels were a little bit higher, but they were pretty much in line with the trends that I was seeing.
This is Lycoming. Is it possible that it's the oil pump impeller gear?
Well, that's I was wondering because depending on which service bulletin he's complied with, you've got the aluminum housing, aluminum gears, iron gears. All those should be gone by now. But and once you get stuff in there, it continues to scrape and tear things apart.
Well, I was pretty sure that it wasn't coming from the from the accessory case or the oil pump, just because of since I was able to find the shavings both in the filter and in the sump, where the suction screen is, that I would have figured the only way it could get from the oil pump, if that was wearing, is it would have to have completely clogged the filter to open the bypass valve in order to recycle the oil, basically past the filter and get it back to the sump. So my logic was
it's coming from the engine. Yeah.
It had to come from the case, most likely somewhere in the pistons, because those are really the only things that are aluminum in the engine, the piston or the piston pins.
Unless it's a severe case of case fretting or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but
these are really thin, large, thin flakes.
Yeah, long, sort of very long. The way I described it is, having been a machinist, is if you take an end mill, turn that up the head speed, the spindle speed up real high to where you're cutting like a finish cut, and just barely touch whatever the aluminum that you're milling is kind of the way that the flakes were coming off.
You haven't sent any of this stuff out to a lab for
I did
analysis. Have you?
I did. I sent the when I first noticed this, I did send the filter out to a lab and had
aviation laboratories.
Correct. And they confirmed indeed that it was aluminum. also, I followed from your book, Mike.
But what aluminum alloy is it? Because
they did not provide me the alloy.
they
just said
normally
it was
give you an
aluminum.
AMS number back
Yeah.
that tells you what the alloy is, because the piston pin plugs are very, very soft. They're sacrificial plugs that are pretty close to commercially pure aluminum, whereas the pistons and the case are much harder aluminum alloys.
Yep. The analysis that I got back was pretty much just saying it was nearly pure aluminum. They didn't give me like any sort of alloy number.
Yeah, if it's close to pure aluminum, it almost has to be the piston pin plugs.
And
which cylinder? Yeah.
Yep. And
the reason I asked you how long it was doing this was because, about half the time a piston pin plug scuffing sort of self-resolves as the piston pin migrates back the other way.
Correct. And that's where I kind of followed the guidance to see if it would sort of self-heal itself, and stop making metal. But it did not per their guidance. And again, following the Lycoming book, it said, yeah, if it keeps doing this, then you really got to figure out where it's coming from.
You got to attack the engine with tools.
Yep. And towards that end, if you'd like to know, I did, it has been repaired.
Oh.
So if you want to know what I was curious as to what your answer might be, but
we were being tested.
Yes.
Dang.
Hate when they do that.
No, I'm telling you. So what was the resolution?
The resolution was not one, not two, but all four of the jugs were removed to figure out which ones it was. It ended up that at least two of the piston pins were fairly worn. Not probably as much as what you were saying, Colleen, but when I have them sitting down here in my shop next to me, and to the level of precision that my dial calipers can provide, the worst one probably wore about 0.006 off of it.
Oh, that's nothing. Yeah.
And the other thing they found when the engine shop pulled the cylinders was signs of ring chatter. Because one of the cylinders, they're starting to get, as they put it, a washboard pattern worn into it.
What kind of cylinders were these? Were these Superior cylinders?
Yeah, they are Superior, just steel cylinders, no plating.
Just so you know, Superior has had a problem with ring chatter, and they've traced it down to. I actually talked to Bill Ross at AirVenture this year. They traced it down to a problem with how the cylinders were being honed. They weren't getting a proper crosshatch pattern, and they've been real good about replacing those cylinders under warranty. If they have that thing that looks like ring chatter, it's kind of striations.
Correct.
Circumferential striations, if that's the right term, on the cylinder. But that turned out to be a manufacturing error, and Superior's been pretty good about replacing those cylinders under warranty that had that problem.
Yep, and my engine shop actually said pretty much the same thing what you just said, Mike. And they also acknowledged that typically what they've seen is it'll both wear the piston pins as well as it'll have that ring chatter up until they take them off, rehone them. And reassemble. So they also checked the pistons where the ring lands are, the grooves are, and they said that they were a little bit on the wide side. And so I got, besides 4 cylinders pulled, rehoned, 4 brand new pistons, rings, and 4 brand new piston pins. So hopefully that addresses the making metal problem. But they couldn't even determine which cylinders to pull just by bore scoping it.
I don't buy the flakes in the filter caused by 6,000s coming off of one of your piston pins. That doesn't make sense to me at all. That sounds like a lot of metal. I mean, I certainly hope you found the problem, but.
Yep. And no, they, again, this was the amount that I I measured off of the pins. I don't know the initial tolerancing of how close that this particular manufacturer machines those ends of those piston pins. And also, I will definitely say that my ability to accurately measure that delta is suspect, probably at best.
Yeah.
But
I don't think they would have worn in flakes like that. That's not been my experience. Like Paul said, it looks like smearing. The aluminum is so sacrificial in those piston pin plugs, the end caps, that it is like it smears off. It doesn't flake off in my experience. And they probably looked polished, right? When you look at them, they look like they've been polished down.
So the ones that were properly worn in were, yes, they are definitely polished like a mirror at the end. Nice little button polish mark. The ones that were worn definitely looked like they were machined, where it was almost like you took them to a like a deli slicer and we're just like, like literally just shearing off very fine amounts of metal.
Okay.
Just a speculative thought, if there was a problem with the way those cylinders were honed at the factory, that was sufficient to cause that kind of ring chatter, it also might be sufficient to cause an abnormal wear on the piston pin plugs.
I buy that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Colleen didn't. Her wear was just typical piston pin sliding to one side. Yeah.
Yeah. And everything that I've said is like, those things look like they're designed to wear against the side of the cylinders. There's no snap ring or clip ring to hold them centered like in a car engine. Which
they're just there to prevent the steel
on there.
pin from ever touching the steel cylinder wall and scoring it. They're purely sacrificial.
It definitely, when I looked at all the parts that I was handed when I picked the airplane up, it was pretty clear that the metal was probably most likely coming from those piston pins because it was very obviously like machined down.
Yeah, interesting.
But I was also glad to hear that the cylinders were able to be rehoned and fortunately reused. So
we passed the test.
You guys got it. And hopefully anybody else out there that finds two of the three of us got it. Colleen was saying, no, it couldn't be that, right?
Well, that was a real shocker. But I mean, at least you didn't just say, oh gosh, we need a new engine. I mean, you did all the investigative follow-up that you needed to do and found the problem. That's awesome.
I'm pretty impressed with your mechanic that went along with the idea of let's follow Lycoming's guidance on what to do. Because an awful lot of mechanics and owners would have looked at that and panicked, like Colleen was saying, and pulled the engine. I get that call. Yeah, and probably once a month from a customer.
The big issue is that Lycoming does provide really very well thought through guidance about, how to react to metal in an oil filter. And Continental provides zippity doodah in that area. No guidance whatsoever. So if it happens to a Continental engine, the mechanic doesn't really have any applicable guidance. We try to convince them to use the Lycoming guidance anyway because Continental doesn't have any guidance, and some guidance is always better than no guidance. And the Lycoming stuff's pretty well thought through. But
the thing about following that guidance, we as mechanics, we follow guidance that's not provided by the manufacturer. Frequently, we'll go to an advisory circular. We'll go to military handbook number 5. We'll go to all kinds of places. But for some reason, when you start talking about engines, it's like, oh no, I'm working on a Continental. Therefore, I can't use any information that Lycoming has and vice versa. And the truth is, they're pretty much the same engine. There's not a whole lot of difference.
And, there's some areas like cam condition where Continental has good guidance and Lycoming doesn't have, and other things like the metal and the filtered stuff we were just talking about, where Lycoming has good guidance and Continental doesn't. So, we really think you can go find the best possible guidance that's available, even if it isn't from the manufacturer.
Right.
because good guidance is better than no guidance.
Yeah. And
Yes.
some guidance in the right way is better than, attacking the engine with tools.
And mechanics always want to have, some guidance to fall back on. So if they wind up in the deposition in front of a nasty plaintiff lawyer saying, "Why did you do that?" The mechanic says, "Because here's where it's written."
Here's where it's written. And I don't blame me or us, my world of mechanicking. It's like, I want to have something to say why I did what I did. Absolutely.
Yes, fortunately, my mechanic is one in which he likes to start at the easy answer and work up, and not immediately jump to the most extreme solution. So
I like your mechanic.
That's why I was sad that you had to pull all 4 cylinders off. But I guess
But it sounds like that was what you had to do.
It was going to go that way anyway because of the washboarding. So good job, though. Yeah.
Well, so Emily's back in the air.
Emily will be back in the air. She is with my mechanic right now, getting her annual done. So hopefully in the
incestuous. Okay,
it is. It's one part got touched, and so the other one got jealous.
Yeah.
If the engine just came back from the engine shop, then he doesn't have very much work to do on the engine.
And that's my hope. So we'll see at the end what he found, but otherwise she flew back great from the engine shop, and now I just got to run it at 65+% power for the next 10-20 hours to break in the new.
I hate doing that.
Should run it at 100% power.
Switching around, break those cylinders.
You can.
Yeah,
Colleen, unfortunately, it's not a racer like you. Yeah.
Oh, it is. It is.
Oh, yeah.
They all have a racer's heart. Just
it's all in the pilot's mindset. It has nothing to do with the equipment, right?
That's right.
That's right.
Well, thank you all very much for taking my question and for the show. And I do listen to y'all on the podcast quite a bit.
We can
Emily,
tell.
you go, girl.
Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate the call.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
And the test.
Yeah.
All right, so it's time for letters. The first, Mike, you talked about your mini fridge not being 12 inches off the ground of your hangar and being docked for that.
Oh, gosh.
And Kelly says...
Boy, they don't miss anything.
No. Kelly says, Mike didn't understand why his mini fridge needed to be 12 inches off the floor. It's because of a fuel vapor explosion. Most refrigerators do not have sealed relays for the compressor, and a contact arcing could ignite any fuel vapor in the enclosed hangar space.
Oh.
I didn't know fuel vapors stayed down
low
12 inches. That's interesting.
Yeah. This is interesting.
My parents had a house blow up in Fort Worth like forever ago, back in the
because their mini fridge was too close to the ground.
No, it wasn't from that. It was
gas leak,
heating gas, but it underneath the house it found a low spot under the foundation. I know it's a different thing, but
Paul, your family has a problem with fire. Like, didn't you?
Did
your hangar also go up in flames?
Yeah, Paul.
When I first moved into my home, which is like 44 years ago, I've been living here a long time. We were on propane, and propane is heavier than air. So if you have a propane link, it all hangs around low near the floor.
Yeah, that's what this one did.
And then eventually they ran a natural gas main, and we switched to natural gas. Natural gas, I guess, floats up high. So,
and they all smell worse now than they used to.
On purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
They call that perfume, but.
So Kelly, he also mentions the Cherokee 180 with the strut that kept falling, and we're talking about how to fix that.
Oh, the nose strut.
He said, Yep. He said the suggestion on changing the aluminum gasket under the strut valve or a new core may fix it. As old as the aircraft is, it may be the problem I had. He said my 76 Warriors mains would not hold air. And 3 years ago, he had done what was suggested with no change. He even installed new strut valves. The problem was the cylinder head O-ring was leaking air. So the only way to replace the O-ring is to remove the strut, since the wing's access hole allows for servicing, but not removing the cylinder head. He found the easiest way to R&R the strut is to remove the fuel tank, since his hands and arms weren't the size of a capuchin monkey, he says.
Wait, what kind of monkey?
Yeah, capuchin.
Capuchin.
Yeah, do you know capuchins? They're white-faced monkeys.
No.
Something else to look up. Man,
Yeah, and this I don't know, but I had seen that. So there's an STC apparently to enlarge the opening, but you have to
Oh.
remove the strut to install it, and that would make sense, of course, for something like a flight school, but maybe not
he
for an
needed to
owner.
pull the tank off and inspect all that anyway. There's service bulletins, there's AD on the spar, they corrode. There's a vent line up there that the little rubber hose deteriorates and it vents into the tank will vent into the wing instead of venting overboard. So that was a good thing.
No, the
We'll
whole
call
the
that
whole
a good
business about having to remove the fuel tank in order to remove the strut proves something that we've known for a long time, which is the people who design these airplanes never work on them.
That's
Yeah.
right. Absolutely.
Yep. And
Everyone should experience changing a tank on a Cherokee.
then there's a rite of passage.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
And Paul, you were talking about you were making a trip. I think it was a pre-buy, maybe they had to do on the east side of New York City, maybe Long Island or something.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were talking about that you would
And you
not
flew
fly there.
commercially, as I recall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
right.
No, I have
So-
I have flown up in that area.
Well, Dan was disappointed.
Oh gosh.
He said, listen to your podcast and chuckled at your comment about the New York City airspace and the TWA hotel at JFK. You need to go.
Yes.
Not only is it a great hotel, but they have a heated pool that overlooks the ramp. And they have
Oh,
converted,
really?
Yeah, an
Oh,
old Super
that's cool.
Connie into a lounge and martini bar.
Oh, we
So,
need
of
to
course,
do that.
most of us would never fly to LaGuardia, but he said he flew there for an overnight in his Cherokee 6, and it was a great experience. They parked at Modern Aviation, which is the
I
only
don't want
build-
to ask what the ramp fee was.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not as bad as you might think. He said it was $200 to land, park, and overnight.
That's
That's
not horrible.
Oh, it's not LaGuardia, it's JFK. So that's
And-
not too bad. Yeah.
At Kennedy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he
Well,
said the
so
most
my pre-buy
entertaining
wasn't
part was
at Kennedy. It was
A
Yeah. East of there.
long time ago, I flew my Cessna 182 into Kennedy. And it was at night, and I got lost on the taxi.
oh no.
The taxiways at Kennedy are so complicated.
Progressive.
I
Yeah,
would
as long as it
find-
wasn't during a push.
I'm
right?
not even
Yeah.
sure that I was within line of sight of the control tower. It's such a big airport.
I'm not averse to big airports, but on this particular flight, because I've been in that airspace, I took the test, so you could fly through it and all that. That was years ago. But on this particular flight, the cost of flying myself there was just
Yeah.
excessive.
Yeah.
And, the buyer didn't want to pay me to fly my
Sure.
airplane up
Someone
there.
else's money. Yeah.
Yeah. But LaGuardia, the reason I went there was purely because it was the only place I had a direct flight out of Memphis. To go to JFK required I go to,
Dulles or-
Alaska or Bangladesh
Alaska.
or somewhere else first. Then I could get there.
But this cool hotel is at Kennedy, right?
It's at Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently
We
it's a
need
JFK.
we need to come up with some good excuse for us to
Road
all go
trip.
there.
I think
Road trip.
we should do the podcast from there.
From the heated
Yeah.
pool.
Absolutely, I love it.
Yeah.
Can we get some waterproof microphones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ian, you got to make
No
this
video
happen.
though, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
You're
that
not going to
sounds
have
like
much sympathy, It's like people call in and they're like facing these really
No,
serious
the
problems, and you
videos
guys are
fine.
Yeah.
They'll
You know,
only be
sit
able
back
to
with your
see
Mai
us from
Tai.
they'll only be able to see us from the neck up. The rest of us will be underwater.
That's
Yeah.
right. We'll have appropriate aviation
We
background.
could simulate that in Mike's hot tub at Paso Robles. We could just go up there
But with
Sit in the hot tub
a green
and put a green
and
screen
conning
behind
deck.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do want to go there. If I ever have
That does sound cool.
an occasion to go in that area, I will
Mhm.
I will purposely go to JFK. I've told Helen, we have to come up with some reason to go there.
Mhm.
It just looks really cool.
Well,
cool.
I mean, in the, when you look at sort of major primary class B airports around the country, $200 it's really not
Not
too
bad.
bad.
Yeah.
It's
for a
not
single
terrible.
engine.
If
And
that's
this
where
is-
you need to go.
This is called the TWA Hotel.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It is
Oh, do you
very
have a
retro
lounge?
and very
Lounge?
cool.
Sounds
Yeah.
like a destination.
So our next question is from Malcolm, who has an engine that just isn't sure it wants to go flying with him. What's up, Malcolm?
That's right. My real problem is I don't really know if I have a problem. I'm getting some conflicting information. So I figured I'd reach out to the experts and see if I could clear this matter up a little bit. So like I said, the first part is understanding that this is a bit of a different airplane. It is a 1976 182P with a Texas Skyways conversion. So that's an O550, where I'm sure you guys are familiar with this conversion.
Yep.
And
It's the
what
engine
is
that
happening?
Continental does not want to admit.
Yeah.
exists.
It doesn't exist.
That's right. They took out all the great fuel injection, threw a carburetor on it, and called it a day. So the airplane came with it. We're very happy with the power that it puts out, but it does have this strange issue. And it is essentially, it's the first start of the day. So it is the cold start, all the oil's in the bottom. And it can be a cold Monterey morning at 40, 50 degrees, or a hot San Diego morning at 75, 80 degrees. And it is that first roll. So when it first hit start, it'll turn between 0 and 2 blades. So it's just somewhere in a full rotation. It'll hit a full stopping point, usually with a blade up. The entire system will strain. I can actually sometimes see the lights flicker a little bit. And then it gets over that hump, and the engine fires up. After it's run, 30 seconds, 1 or 2 minutes, I never have this problem again. I can stop the engine, start it back up. I can fly somewhere, get gas, start it back up. Everything's warm, everything's happy. It's just this first stop. Now, my partner and I have been of the mind of, hey, it's not broke, don't fix it. But the A&Ps we've talked to have said, no, it's broke, you have to fix it. So here's everything we've done. We have thrown a lot of money at not fixing this problem. We put a new starter on it, because I was supposed to fix it and it didn't. We had the battery checked.
The starter.
Yeah, the battery checked great. We bought a battery tender. That didn't fix it. I'm trying to think of what else we did, but those are the main things that we've done.
But it's so obvious what the problem is. Why is everybody doing all this other stuff that has nothing to do with it? So the good news is that if you don't fix this problem, it will not make you fall out of the sky. The bad news is if you do not fix this problem, it's going to strand you someplace.
You're never getting into the sky.
It's probably going to strand you in Sheep Dip, Nebraska. Our favorite place to get stuck.
Yep.
Because they don't even have a Motel 6 in Sheep Dip, Nebraska.
Right. Luckily, I can sleep in the back seat if I curl up really.
If you don't fix this problem pretty soon, you might just have to do that.
Yeah. Hey,
so
Ian,
we've had this
can you
problem
hit the play
for
again
2
there
years.
so we can see it hesitate?
Yeah. And the other thing that we had to actually at one point, and it's a long, terrible COVID supply chain nightmare story, we had to actually send the engine out for an IRAN. And so they cracked the case. They put it all back together with a new crankshaft and a new camshaft. Again, I hope not part of this, but we also overhauled the governor of the propeller at the same time. I thought, boy, I bet that starting problem's going to be all gone.
You needed a new
Get the engine and the prop and the governor. Yeah, it all came back. And it still has the same.
And it still had the same problem after all that.
Still has the same. Still has the same issues.
Because
the
one thing
we haven't replaced is the starter adapter.
Exactly, because that's the one thing that is exactly what's wrong, and why that wasn't obvious to your mechanic is beyond me.Maybe he didn't get to see your video. But
he got to start the engine.
This is a very standard Continental problem.
Maybe he works on Lycoming.
The symptom is the starter motor turns, but the prop doesn't turn. Well, there's only one thing that can cause that, and that's the gizmo that connects the starter to the crankshaft. It's called a starter drive adapter or a starter adapter, and it's a weird kind of a very bizarre sort of a clutch that was modeled after a Chinese finger trap or something. That there's something called a shaft gear, which is a very expensive piece of metal that Continental's very proud of, that has a gear at one end that hooks that is geared to the crankshaft and has a knurled drum that has a big giant spring over the top of it, and the starter motor turns the spring. The spring tightens up and grabs the drum, turns the shaft gear, which cranks the engine. Then once the engine fires and the shaft gear is turning faster than the spring is, then the spring kind of lets go of its death grip on the drum, and the the shaft gear just freewheels inside the spring. So it's a peculiar kind of clutch. And if the inside of the spring or the outside of the drum or both of those wear a certain amount, then the thing starts to slip. Now, let me ask you a question. You said you changed the starter motor,
Yeah.
which you clearly didn't need to do. But what kind of starter motor is on there? Is it a lightweight starter or is it a heavyweight starter?
It is a lightweight. I remember specifically it was a lightweight starter motor.
ST3 or ST5 or something like that?
I believe it is a SkyTech. I don't know the exact model number. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if it's an ST3, you want to get rid of it. We had lots of problems with the ST3 because it cranks the engine about 2/3 as fast as other starters do, and it doesn't have enough torque to really clamp that spring down hard on the drum. The opposite side of the coin is that Iskra starter that Continental used to ship with the engines like crazy, and it had way too much torque, and it tore up the drum something fierce, and sometimes it snapped the spring. It had such high starter.
But he won't have that one because they just replaced it, and those haven't been on the market in a long time.
But the if you have a SkyTech ST5, or there are a couple other lightweight starters that work okay with this starter drive adapter, and I'm a big fan of the old heavyweight Energizer direct drive starter. Doesn't have any gearing in it and stuff, but it's a little heavier. But it's I think by far the most reliable starter that you can get. But at any rate, your problem is that your starter drive adapter is slipping, and it will need to come off and be sent out for repair. And the repair on those consists of putting it back together with an undersized spring that has a closer fit on your drum. The drum gets remachined and reknurled, and then an undersized spring gets installed. And there's 2 or 3 different sizes of undersized springs, so you can actually do this a couple of times to a starter adapter before you have to replace the shaft gear, which is like a really expensive piece of metal.
Probably less than $1,000 for this repair.
That's not that bad.
Okay.
And Niagara is the place to send it?
Niagara is one. GNN will do them as well.
Oh, GNN does them? Okay.
Yep. And you don't need it overhauled, probably. So just get it repaired. So there's another little bit of information here as well. Mike talked about the spring torquing onto the drum.
Twerking?
And, well, no, we're not twerk.
It's grabbing.
Grabbing,
yes.
Whatever. Torque, TORQUE. Anyway.
It tightens.
It tightens around the drum. So the starter motor has to have enough torque to make this happen rapidly to really get a good grip. And that can be, the slippage that Mike talked about, you're going to get stuck because every time it slips, it wears more, makes it more difficult to grab the next time. You can plug in, when you do get stuck somewhere, you can plug in external power, and that will give you said this was a P model, so you're a 28 volt airplane. So
no, I'm a 12 volt airplane.
Oh, early P. Okay. So when you plug in external power, a 12 volt power plug-in like a battery cart, it's not going to help you. You need 14 volts to get this thing to torque well. You also have a battery mounted in the tail of the airplane. So when you did all this wonderful upgrade with the new engine and everything, you may have the original starter relay. And so this is an electronics thing. Your battery's in the back. You have a lot of line loss from the battery to the starter. And this is a real weird kind of test to do for people that don't really understand voltmeters. But you can put a voltmeter on the positive terminal of the battery and the power terminal of the starter, engage the starter, and measure the voltage drop between those two.
And that very much.
It should be 1 to a half a volt to a volt at the most. If it's more than that, you've got some resistance issues that are contributing to the problem. You already have damage to the starter adapter, so you know you got to do that. But before you go back together, let's check these other things. And that the starter relay is going to be one of the top ones.
And the cable is the other one, and you don't want to hear it's the cable because that's a pain to replace. I almost said it wasn't a pain.
From the back to the front, I can imagine.
It's a cable as thick as your thumb, practically, and it's hard to thread that. And it's expensive. It's a lot of copper or aluminum.
Right.
So,
sometimes you can just put new ends on the existing cable.
Recrimp.
That's the most common problems, are the connectors at the ends of the cable.
Mm-hmm. But our old Cessnas, all of them have this issue one way or another.
A very special crimping tool to do that job properly. Because that's number 0 or number 2 or something like that.
Yeah, it's usually 2 gauge. And if you buy the crimper, it has yellow handles and it crimps it square. It's real funny. It's sold by a lot of aviation houses as a crimper for big terminals. And when you get it and take it out of the box, it has a big label on it that says, "Not for aviation use."
Really? That's strange.
And for most applications, it will crimp good enough. But if you want a real crimper, our crimper is about a $4,000 hydraulic.
Oh God, you have a hydraulic one?
Oh yeah, it's a hand operated, but it's hydraulic, and it crimps the thing. You think it's just smashing it to death, but that's what it takes.
It is.
Yep. And you'll have a lot of loss at the end of those wires.
Yeah.
So
because of corrosion, right?
Yep.
But anyway, just to clarify what Paul was saying earlier, because he said it in a very, very inscrutable way that may have not made it across. If you get stuck somewhere with a slipping continental starter adapter,
don't get out your sleeping bag.
You didn't go get it fixed, but you just lived with it, which we see a lot of owners do. Then you very likely could get home if you can get somebody to connect a 14-volt APU to your airplane, because the starter motor will have a little bit more torque running on 14 volts than on the ship's battery that has 12 volts. And that's usually enough to get another half a dozen starts out of the starter adapter.
To get that Chinese finger torture thing to squeeze.
Exactly.
Well, that actually reminds me.
You really need to get that thing repaired.
Okay. My partner actually did get stranded and couldn't start the airplane at one point. He called our A&P, who advised him to take the cowling off and get a hammer and whack the solenoid. I think the solenoid or the starter. I said, that sounds like my old Chevy when I was a kid.
That's to free up a stuck starter relay, but that's not going to help. That's not going to help.
It worked. Yeah,
it worked.
He whacked this thing pretty hard, and then he was able to start it.
That was a different problem.
Yeah, well, that does indicate that you have high resistance in that starter relay.
Possibly,
is that the power?
Or it might have been the starter, though.
The other thing you could tell from that video is that he has a lot better compression in one cylinder than he does in a couple of the other cylinders.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Why is that? Because
the prop would turn through a couple of compression strokes, but then it got to a really nice tight cylinders, and it couldn't get any further.
Yeah.
Well, that's the main issue that I hit is when it hits that wall, it just stops.
Yeah,
right.
And then it
slips.
Going again.
That's
because it's slipping. It doesn't have the torque.
You can pull your prop through and feel the compression on each cylinder.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
You have impulse couplings.
Just be careful. He's saying be careful.
Do not do that.
Okay.
But a lot of the time when we see these slipping starter adapters, the starter motor will turn and the prop blade will just twitch a little bit, and then get stuck. But yours actually twitched through a couple of blades before it got stuck. So
that's what it does. It turns a couple of blades, gets stuck, and then keeps going.
But trust me, it's going to get worse.
Yep.
Okay.
So do something about it. Don't get stuck. Don't get stuck in sheep dip.
And
All right.
Mel,
Well, we're coming up on the annual, so maybe this is
Yeah,
a good
I mean,
time,
if
'cause
if you get
Good
stuck
time.
in sheep dip, you can call us and we'll bail you out in sheep dip, but it's going to cost you.
I charge big money for road trips.
Yeah, the hazardous duty pay to go to sheep dip.
right.
and
Yeah. It should be.
Malcolm, in your question, you said if you weren't of a certain ripe age, you would like to get your A&P. And I just want to put a pitch.
Yes,
You don't
okay.
have to. You don't have to get your entire A&P. I would recommend just trying a couple courses in subjects you're interested in.
Yeah.
You would really
I got
enjoy
my
it.
A&P when I was about 60 years old. So
That is ripe, Mike.
Well,
That's pretty ripe.
ripe
There's
as
hope
in
for me yet.
Limburger cheese, or what kind of ripe are you talking
It's
about?
riper than where Malcolm is right now, but it's never too
Right.
late. But if it's a time thing, try a couple courses.
Yeah.
You
I might
enjoy
do
it.
that. There were some courses in San Diego, but I haven't found any up here in Montreal.
Yeah,
I teach some of them too.
We know of some nefarious instructors down
Yes.
in San Diego.
Yeah.
The very
particular?
first course that the entry to the program is called the general course, where you learn everything from FARS to hardware to metallurgy.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. It's so much fun. And that's just one term's commitment. And maybe that's all you do, but it will help you be a better owner.
I'll take a look. I will, Colleen, I will say this. My first discovery flight was out of Gillespie Field. I forget the thing, and I think you're housed down there, your hangar down there. So
Oh, okay.
in my logbook is number one airport
Yeah.
that I've flown out of. So
Yeah, it's a
I'll
great
take
airport.
a look.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate all the help.
Thanks,
Great
Malcolm.
question.
Enjoyed the call.
Okay, let's stick a fork in this episode. Hopefully, we got something right, or I'm sure we'll be hearing from our listeners. As always, we love to hear from you. Keep sending us your tricky questions. You can email us at podcasts@aopa.org.
See ya.
So long.